Alright. Going live. We're live. Yeah, no, live. What's up, stream, if you're here? We're gonna interview with Michael Huemer today. We're waiting for him to get in. He's gonna come like next 10 minutes, and we're just chilling for now.
If it's just us five, I don't think you need to pin any of us specifically. Yeah. You can just pin Huemer. I thought there was going to be a lot of people in here, so. But if it's just us, we'll just have, actually, can you do the one where whoever's talking gets pinned?
I think I can.
So it'll just do like whoever is the main voice talking at the moment, and it'll like automatically.
I think it's that.
Wait, it's already like that right now.
Yeah.
Oh, for some reason.
Oh, Michael Huemer's here.
Oh, speaker view. Yeah.
Huemer's here.
Oh, okay. You can let him in then.
Yep.
Oh, is it? Right, I'm not going to talk for those 10 minutes. I need to figure out what questions about phenomenal conservatism I'm going to ask exactly.
Okay.
Give me 20 minutes.
Welcome in, Professor Huemer.
Hi, how's it going?
I'm well, how are you?
Good.
All right, well, today we have Professor Michael Huemer with us. He's a professor of philosophy at the University of Colorado Boulder. He's the author of many books, including Ethical Intuitionism and the Problems of Political Authority. I'd like to thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. If you want to give yourself an introduction, please do, and then we can get into the questions.
Okay, so I'm a professor in the philosophy department at the University of Colorado. And I've written something like 70 articles and about 6 books. You can find my website, owl232.net. And I also have a blog that's fun to look at called Fake News, fakenous.net.
Awesome. So I guess my first question, like starting in, is so in your book, The Problem of Political Authority, you talk about other justifications for libertarianism and how you don't necessarily find them to your fancy. One of them in particular is because it relies on Naverson's meta-ethics, which the entire book is based, you're building off of like this common sense morality position. And as you're an intuitionist, which is typically considered the common sense morality position, are you saying that this appeal to common sense in Problems of Political Authority is not contingent upon like intuitionism? Like, are you saying like even subjectivists like typically hold these common sense beliefs?
Yes, I mean, so we're talking about things like you shouldn't go up to people on the street and mug them. Right? So that's the sort of intuitions that we're talking about. Okay, almost everyone agrees with that, and it's not dependent on like a weird abstract philosophical theory, right? So there might be people who disagree with those things, like nihilists, right? Like nihilists would say, no, nothing's wrong.
Right.
Should or shouldn't be done. Okay, but then they're the ones who are holding a weird philosophical theory, right? Okay. Most people, including anti-realists, so subjectivists and non-cognitivists, attempt to recover common sense morality, right? Like if you talk to a relatively normal, not jerky subjectivists, they will attempt to explain why, on their view, you can still say it's wrong to mug people on the street.
Right.
They don't want it to come out that, oh yeah, it's fine to mug people, right?
Right.
Because they're not jerks.
Right.
They're not trying to make their position completely implausible.
Right. So on the topic of nihilism, I remember in your book you talk about how you believe it would be typically on the nihilist to prove that it's more plausible that there are not ethical truths than it is that there are ethical truths. So I just kind of wanted to ask if you had any other, like, what would your main objections be to the nihilist position?
Yeah, I mean, that is the main objection. I mean, my main problem with nihilism is, I think you shouldn't torture babies. And their view implies that that's false.
Right.
False.
Okay.
You shouldn't torture babies. Okay, but and other stuff like that. So it's not, not just that, but like, I shouldn't take this pencil and jam it in my eye right now. I think that's true.
Right.
Your view implies that that's false.
Right.
They wouldn't say I should jam it in. They would say, well, there's no fact either way, right?
Right.
Not jam it in.
I got you. So what was I? Okay. So in regards to your meta ethics, I take it that you're a Platonic realist.
Yes.
Okay. So I was just going to ask, would you say that your ethics are contingent upon this Platonic realism? And what would your general response to be to nominalism or people who reject the dichotomy? I know a lot of like Randians or people who are kind of inspired by Rand say that it's kind of a false dichotomy between the two.
Yeah, I mean, so, first let me say what Platonic realism is, in case listeners don't know. So I think universals exist, and I think they exist necessarily. Okay, what's a universal? Well, it's something that multiple things could have in common. So like red is a universal because there could be multiple things that are the same in a certain respect, namely redness. Okay, and the Platonist thinks that these things exist necessarily. So even if there are no red objects, it's still true that red exists. Okay, now, when I first heard about this issue, I first heard about the issue in the form of like, do numbers exist, okay? But I think that's a form of the same issue. Basically, I think numbers are universals. So like 2 is something that this has in common with this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not being fingers.
Right.
Anyway, but who cares? Never mind numbers.
No, you're fine.
When I first heard this, I thought I didn't quite understand what the question was. Like, does 2 exist? I'm not even sure I understand what that means, for to exist or not exist. Okay, but the way that it's frequently understood in metaphysics, like contemporary academic discussions of metaphysics, is it exists if there's like a true statement that has the thing as subject, and to interpret what the statement is saying, you have to refer to the thing in question that we're talking about, whether it exists. Okay, so and there's like no way of paraphrasing the sentence to be about something else, right? So this is why I think universals exist, because there are facts, like there are statements that are really true and they correspond to a fact, and they appear to be about universals. Okay, so like 2 is less than 3.
Right.
I think that entails that 2 exists. So okay, yellow is a color. That's true. It's about yellow, so yellow must exist. And I don't think there's an adequate explanation of what it means that doesn't have it being a statement about yellow.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so go ahead. Sorry.
So did I answer the question, or wait?
Yeah, I think so. I think it adequately addresses like if like both of us, me and you, like come to like this common conception that yellow must exist necessarily. Well, then it can't just be a conception of our minds, which would be like the nominalist position that it's like within our minds, correct?
Yeah, like it's dependent on the mind or on language or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. Why do I think that it's not dependent on the mind? So like I think the sun is yellow, and it was yellow before the word yellow existed. Mm-hmm. And right, I think there are 8 planets in the solar system, and I think that they were there before humans existed.
Right.
And there were 8 of them. Right. It wasn't a different number, and it wasn't no number. It wasn't somehow like a completely non-quantitative collection of planets or whatever.
Okay. So I was reading through your book that you edited on Epistemology, and I noticed something from like Bertrand Russell. And would you hold that like relations to be like universals, like in, outside? Okay, cool. So I noticed in Problems of Political Authority, when talking about these conceptions of oligopolization, cartelization, monopolization of the defense agencies, you footnote to Klosko, who says that agencies would need to regularize their standards and procedures, but then you said you didn't exactly know what it means. Then a few pages later, at the beginning, on the first page of chapter 11, you talk about parties agreeing to a procedure to resolve their problems. If I'm understanding his argument correctly, Klosko is saying that the courts or the rights enforcement agencies would want to get together to establish that they all enact like this same procedure, the same operating procedures, how they investigate. Do you have a defendant? Do you have a jury? How many, like, and they would want to hold these same procedures. And so I think his argument is that they would get together and they would try and form this procedure that they would all agree to, which would lead to a sort of oligopolization, as they would want to stop competition from arising that would use a different procedure. For example, like I myself could say, well, I'm claiming to investigate Joey. I say that my neighbor Joey committed a crime, and I'm going to walk onto his property and investigate. That's a procedure that I'm enacting, which would kind of stray from the norm that these courts may have established. So I think what he is saying, I could be misinterpreting him, but I think what he's saying is that there would be like this tendency towards, at the very least, an oligopolization of a procedure, and maybe even a monopolization if people would want to, because at that point people would want to there to be like a final arbiter, because if this court has this procedure and court B has a different procedure, and you go to arbitration at court A and you don't like the outcome, and you try and countersue them in court B based off of the procedure they used, it would lead to like this almost like a constant state of a disagreement. I think that they would try and resolve this as best as possible peacefully. But I think that the argument is that they potentially people would want there to be like a final arbiter that just said, this is the procedure.
Yeah. I mean, so maybe we should distinguish standardization from monopolization. Mm-hmm. So there are some things that you want to be standardized, and that frequently do get standardized, even in the free market. So, like a famous example is the label of the keyboard, your computer, right? Now, every time I get a computer or type on a keyboard, it always has the same layout. And that's good, right? Right. You say, oh my God, the QWERTY has a monopoly on keyboard layouts or whatever, right? I mean, it's not a complete monopoly, because I think it is possible to get other layouts, but once
right,
it's almost impossible. But that's good, because you don't want multiple ones. Okay, so some things in the protection industry, I think, would get standardized. And it would be the things that consumers want to be standardized. Okay, but I think that's quite different from a monopoly where there's like only one provider. So like, it's okay with me that there's agreed upon procedures for resolving a dispute, as long as there's not like only one person who's allowed to resolve the dispute, right? Mm-hmm. By the way, I might be forgetting, because I don't completely remember the context of this discussion, so I might be not addressing the...
No, I think you're doing... I've been kind of bouncing around a little bit about the political authority and the ethical intuitionism, because I think they kind of intertwine and like the general like consensus. So I've kind of just been bouncing around between the two, but I think you addressed that kind of properly, I would say. I'm satisfied with the answer. Another one that I haven't really seen a lot of work on, and I think you might have a different answer because than someone like, say, Walter Block or Stephan Kinsella, because as you aren't like a rights absolutist. You think that there are situations where you are justified and legally justified and going against this prima facie don't initiate force against others. I kind of hold that there are times where it would be moral to do so, but I still think that it would be illegal. So like using your boat example that you use in the book, where you force the people to shovel the water out of the boat. I would hold in this scenario, after I pointed the gun at them and I forced them to get us to land, that while I was morally justified in doing so and saving our lives, I think what I did for that period of time was I enslaved them, because I forced them to do labor without compensation. So if they want to, now they might get to land and they might say, hey, I'm not gonna sue you. But I think if they want to, when they get to land, that they have a case against me. Because if not, then I've just employed their labor without paying them.
By the way, like, I'm not sure that all of the audience has read this example. But okay. Anyway, so yeah, so the lifeboat is in danger of sinking, so you force the people to bail it out, right? And like the people are too stupid or like whatever assholes to do it without being forced, so you have to force them. Okay, So there's a legal question and there's a moral question, right? So
Right.
when you get back to dry land, does the current law allow you to sue the person who forced you to bail out water? I think yes. I think as stated, I think you would have a lawsuit. Although, would a jury actually find in your favor? I think no.
Right.
I think a jury would nullify. But anyway, okay, but then the normative question, okay, but should you be able to recover damages? No, I don't think so. Because whatever, who's doing the force? Okay, so I'm forcing the people to bail out the water. I think I did the right thing. So why should I have to pay? And also, I saved their lives.
Right.
So you should subtract the amount of harm that I did to them from the life that I saved,
right,
to get the net amount of harm that I did, which is a net benefit, not a harm.
Right. So I'm going to press a little bit on this one because let's think of a hypothetical contract type deal. So let's assume that these other 4 people, they wanted to die. And you had no reason to believe they were in a bad state of mind. You had no reason to believe that. So I would say okay, if they were clearly out of it and under normal conditions, you'd say, okay, these people definitely would want to live, but we've been out at sea for a while. They're going crazy. Let's just say in this scenario that you had no reason to believe that they didn't actually want to die. Would you still be, in your opinion, justified in forcing them to bail out the boat?
I don't know. I mean, I also wonder what are the damages. So I force them to bail out the water, but they can still jump overboard if they want.
That's true. That's true. That is.
But I mean, I guess. Yeah, so I forced them to live a little bit longer than they wanted to, and my justification might be, well, I wanted to live, and I needed these people to help me live. They're justified. I don't know. I mean, I guess yes. I think it would be justified, right? But I mean, the reason why I brought up that example is it was supposed to be something that a defender of government would say, as an analogy to explain why the government gets to force us to pay taxes or something like that. You'd say look, society is going to fall apart if we don't have a government, and the government will fall apart if they don't get to collect taxes. So that's why it's okay. And then they would say it's analogous to this thing where you can keep the boat afloat.
Right.
Of course.
Okay.
So, I mean, so the case where the people want to die is not analogous, right? Because people do not want society to collapse.
Right. I see. There was something else that I just came to mind, but I'm blanking on it. Something that I haven't seen a lot of literature about, and that is something along the lines of search warrants under a complete private property society. It would seem that when you really dig deep about it, the idea of investigating crimes when you're constantly on somebody's property that doesn't necessarily have to allow you to be there, this could pose more issues than a government who can, which I'm not agreeing that this is okay. I'm just saying that some people, this objection, the government can just say, well, we've established that we can search this property in order to investigate this crime or whatever. So I think that there might be an objection to be made here on investigations could potentially be very difficult in a completely privatized society where, generally speaking, we don't have positive rights to go to and fro on people's property.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess there's a moral philosophy question, is it okay to go search somebody's property? And maybe then there's a sort of practical question, would it actually happen, or would it happen the right amount? I mean, it seems to me well, it's okay to go on somebody's property to search it if you have evidence that they committed a crime. If you have no evidence, then no. The current legal doctrine seems fine to me, morally speaking. And you might wonder, in the anarcho-capitalist society, would they have that norm, or would they instead have a norm that you can't go on another person's property without their permission, even if you do have evidence?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, my guess is they would allow you to trespass, to find evidence of a crime, particularly if the anarchist society evolved from this one, right, where we have that norm, right? And most people accept that norm, so when we move to the other society, they probably accept it. Now you might think, but the property owner is going to say, no, well, I don't accept that, so nobody can come on my property. But like the protection agency of the person who's been the victim of a crime is going to say, well, we're coming anyway, right? And if you want, like, you can raise a dispute with us in one of the private courts. But the private court is going to find in our favor because we're going to show them this evidence of the crime that you committed.
Right. So another question that I think you'd have a bit of a different answer to someone like Block or Kinsella on is in the instance of encirclement. So while like Block or Kinsella would say, well, generally speaking, if you didn't guarantee that you had access to the road in front of your home when you bought the house, like this is something you should make, like you should insure for when you buy the property. But let's just assume that you didn't get insurance that you would have access to come and go from your house. And somebody buys up all the property around you, they encircle you, and they say, well, this is my property, you can't come on it. So basically they trap you in the circle of your property. Would you say you would be justified in going in on their property to get out of your house, basically?
Yes. So, I mean, so at first it sounded like, like the property might have been encircled before you bought it, right? So you got to check when you're buying the property, check whether it's encircled. Right. And if it is, and you buy it anyway, then you might be screwed, okay? But you have a way to get onto that property, so the problem's not going to arise where you get trapped, right? But anyway, it's going to be your fault that you bought the property that you can't access. But if you bought it when you could access it, and then somebody bought the stuff around you, all right, then it's not really your fault. And can you escape? Yes. Why? I mean, you might say like you'd be violating the property rights of the person who bought the property around you, but also if you can't leave your property, then you're basically going to die on it. So can you trespass to save your life? Yes.
Okay. What was I going to say? 1 second. I'm sorry. I'm blanking now.
That's fine. Can I ask
a
question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if I could ask you a question about phenomenal conservatism. What would your response be to the critique of phenomenal conservatism if it's too liberal, or that it allows people to be justified in believing things that are too absurd? I recently saw in a PhD thesis by Michael Huemer a response to this, but I was wondering if I could get your take on it.
It enables you to be justified in believing a bunch of false things. That's true. But like that's not a bad result, that's a correct result, right? People are justified in believing a lot of false things. Let's say, I'm seeing this pencil here, and suppose it turns out that actually I'm having an incredibly realistic hallucination of the pencil. So, okay, and on my view, I'm justified in believing the pencil, right? But because I had no reason to think that it was a hallucination, okay? But that's a correct result, right? Like everybody agrees with that. So there might be other examples that are supposed to be more counterintuitive. Michael Tooley had this sort of thing, like let's suppose, like I believe that God wants me to blow up buildings and like murder a whole bunch of innocent people. And when asked why do I think that, I go, oh, that just seems right to me. And then I want to say, yeah, but I still shouldn't blow up the buildings. Right? And maybe that's the kind of thing. But I mean, that kind of example is sort of mixing epistemic justification with practical justification. Okay. So part of what's going on in that example is if you're going to take action that has a big effect on other people, then you get much higher standards. You have much higher requirements, right? Like you need to be a lot more certain, and you need to do more investigation to make sure that you're correct than you do if you're merely forming a belief that doesn't affect anyone else, right? So part of what's adding. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's almost like in the case of kind of like practical philosophy, you're kind of mixing it with like epistemic contextualism. When it comes to what actions you're taking, there are different degrees of justification which would make that action justified. If you're going to go and blow up a bunch of people, you're gonna need better reasons to do that than whether I should, you know, buy a donut at lunchtime. That's my exact response.
Yeah, so like if it's, you know, all you're doing is some purely self-regarding action, then there's a low degree of justification required. Now, in my view, you have some degree of justification whenever something seems to you to be the case, right? But it's just not going to be enough justification to take action if you're causing a lot of harm to other people and like you don't have any other evidence, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. On to another question. Just as someone that isn't formally trained in philosophy but is a philosophical hobbyist, what specific people, books, or papers kind of led you down the rationalist, internalist road, or which people would you advise that I look at now or keep an eye on going forward?
Yeah, I mean, you know, whenever somebody asks me about who influenced my thought, I have a hard time because, like, basically, I wasn't influenced by very many people. I wasn't influenced much as far as I can tell, right? Let's see, you know, as far as like why I'm a Platonist, that time I actually was significantly influenced by David Armstrong because, you know, his books, like Universals and Scientific Realism, is like two-volume thing, has lots of arguments against nominalism. They're like quick and snappy and fun, and also, you know, they seem compelling to me. About rationalism. I mean, I wasn't actually influenced by anyone, but like I was a rationalist before I read BonJour's book, but BonJour's In Defense of Pure Reason is pretty persuasive. I mean, basically just, there are just lots of examples of synthetic a priori knowledge. And like, you don't need some like, you know, really sophisticated, complicated arguments. You just like, you know, a normal person who's familiar with philosophy can think of lots of examples. Right, so like, I know that there's nothing that's completely red and also completely blue. So I think that's synthetic a priori.
So, oh, sorry. I had a question in regards to your implicit contract. So when you talk about the implicit contract, if you could run me back through like your justification for why using current governmental services, like you laid out a few conditions that must be like met for something to be voluntary, and why you think it's justified in using certain governmental services without necessarily agreeing to or legitimizing the state.
Oh, so wait, so you want me to say why it would be okay to use government services, and that doesn't mean that you're
right.
I mean, so like in the book, I said using government services doesn't show that you agree to have the government. And the reason is, if you didn't use government services, would you then not have to have the government? No. Right? If you don't use them, they're still going to take the same amount of money from you, and they're still going to impose the same laws on you. Therefore, your using them doesn't show that you want to have that money taken from you or have those laws imposed on you. Now, if there was a choice where if you didn't use the services, then you wouldn't have to pay the taxes or something, then it could fairly be said that, you know, people who use the services are agreeing to pay the taxes on that. You know, I had this discussion with Walter Block when I was in New Orleans about whether it's okay to take money from the government, and he said, you know, like money that they shouldn't be giving out, right? Like they're giving out money for whatever, you know, to support the arts and humanities or something, and you know, libertarians are against that. Should you take some of that money if you can? And he said, yes, you should, right? Because it's just like, you know, get it away from the government, right? Because otherwise, you know, the government will just waste it on something else. You know, I found that kind of reasonable, maybe. So that wasn't so clear to me, right? But
I see. So I actually think I have a really good scenario that I kind of use in regards to the hypothetical contract, and kind of wanted to run it by you and ask what you thought about it. So my general response is I say you have a TV and you want to get rid of this TV. You haven't done so yet, but you don't want it anymore. And in the middle of the night, without breaking any of your stuff, a thief comes into your house and takes the TV. Now you wake up the next day, you see the TV gone, and you're not all that upset because, well, you didn't want the TV anyways. And my argument here is, well, usually people would still say, well, someone still snuck into your house and still took something that was yours, whether you wanted it or not. And then I said, now further that, suppose that the thief knew that you wanted to get rid of the TV. They come into your house in the middle of the night, they take your TV, come back the next day, knock on your door, and request payment for the service they provided with you. Now, hypothetically, had they come up and just done that in the first place, you might have agreed to it. But just because you might have agreed to it doesn't mean that that is justified. That doesn't make that the thief not a thief and now an extortionist as well.
Yeah, I agree with this. You know, I give an example, something like this when I teach this subject. Not everyone agrees with it, but my example is that I go around and I give people my book, and then they just like leave it on their doorstep or something, and then later I come back and ask for money for it. Right? So, you know, like when I leave it there, I don't tell them what's going on, right? Because I'm not getting an actual agreement. Right? And then, you know, suppose it turns out that after you read the book, you realize that it was so good, and you know, it's an amazing book, right? You realize that you would have agreed to pay $40 for it if I had asked you. Does that mean that you, in fact, have to pay me $40? So no. The answer is no. Right? Some people, I think, disagree with this and say, yeah, you should pay $40. Okay, but the question isn't if you should. The question is, are you obligated to? So right. You don't know the money because you didn't agree to it. Right. Even if you would have agreed, right? Yeah, this is somewhat like a hypothetical social contract. Oh, we would have agreed to set up a government if somebody had asked us, but nobody asked us. We're not
right.
Obligated.
Right. Now, as I take it, you do believe that you're not an egoist. You do believe we have some moral duties to others. Not like extraordinary moral duties, but we do have moral duties to others. Would, like, as I take it, most of these you establish you think are supererogatory, as in like we're not obligated to do these things, but it would be morally good to do these. Or do you think we have strict obligations to other people?
Yeah, I mean, you know, so it depends upon what kind of case we're thinking of, right? But yeah, if you see a child drowning in the pond, I think you're obligated to pull the child out of the pond, right? It's a shallow pond, right? You could just wade in, pull the child out, and save his life. Yeah, I think we're obligated to pull him out. Right? On the other hand, you know, also the child is poor and he would like to go to college and he can't afford it. Do you have to give him the money to go to college? No. Don't just do that.
Right.
But it would be really nice if you did. So it would be supererogatory, I guess.
So I'm going to run a scenario by you that, again, I've asked Block and Kinsella. They had the same answer, and I think you're going to have a different answer, maybe. So say you're like on the sidewalk with your friend, and you see a car screeching your way. He's going to hit your friend, and you push him out of the way. He stumbles and falls into the pond. Now you saved his life by pushing him out of the way. Now, are you obligated to go save him from the pond?
Yes. So, I mean, I think you would have been obligated to save him even if he fell in on his own without you pushing him. So right. The fact that he was pushed by you doesn't give you less of an obligation, right? Mm-hmm. Now, I mean, you know, it would be a harder question if saving him from the pond was dangerous to you. Mm-hmm. Right? So like, okay, you pushed him into the rapids and, you know, you're not such a good swimmer. And so the question is if you should risk your life jumping into the river to pull him out. Okay, and then I would think, no, you don't have to do that. Right? But if it's just like a trivial thing, like it's just a pond, yeah, I think you have to do that.
Right. Yeah, which is funny because both Block and Kinsella agree. They're like, well, you pushed him and trying to save his life, and we don't have positive. Both of them agree that they think that no, you don't have to save him. It would you would have a moral obligation to save him, but if you decided not to save him, his family couldn't come and sue you and say you murdered my brother. So I just like to get multiple perspectives on that. So that's interesting. I forgot where I was going to go. If anybody else wants to ask something real quick.
Yeah, I have a question. Regarding, like, how do you get from ethical intuitionism, sorry, it's thundering by me, but how do you get from that to veganism?
Well, I mean, my argument for veganism is, I think it's simple, right? Like, I think pain and suffering is bad. I think you shouldn't cause an enormous amount of bad stuff to happen for the sake of relatively minor benefits for yourself. Right? That seems wrong. Right? And I think that factory farming does that. It causes an enormous amount of pain and suffering. And we're doing it for minor benefits for ourselves. And, right? Also, I think that if something is wrong, then it's also wrong to pay other people to do it. Right, and now you ask, okay, and how does this relate to ethical intuitionism? I mean, it's related to ethical intuitionism in the same way that just every moral judgment is related to ethical intuitionism, right? The way that we know about morality just in general is by ethical intuition. But, I think that if you have any plausible ethical view, not nihilism, you should get the same result. Right? Like if you have a plausible meta-ethical view, it should be able to account for straightforward judgments like suffering is bad. Right? Like, and if it can't, then it's just a bad view. Right?
Mm-hmm. So I actually have a question in regards to this. So I know yours isn't like explicitly a consequentialist argument for veganism. You're just saying like prima facie suffering and pain is bad. Factory farming causes pain and suffering. However, I think that to try and, I guess, provide some counterfactuals, I think there's an argument to be made that if we look at like massive farming, like all the pesticides and all the stuff that has to go into producing like mass vegan like food, actually in some instances kills more animals than just factory farming. Would in this instance you would say would this like potentially provide grounding like to sway you in one direction or another?
I mean, if you're worried about the pesticides, you could buy organic food, right? But also, I mean, when they raise the animals, like they feed them, they have to feed the animals, and they feed them a larger amount of food than the amount of food that they get out of them in the end. So, right, like, so there's more plant farming. So meat consumption causes more plant farming than plant consumption, in addition to the animals.
Okay.
So so it can't be that there's more harm caused by just eating plants.
Okay. I was gonna ask something. I'm sorry. If anybody else wants to go again, sorry.
Yeah. I haven't read your books and your works, sadly. The only thing that I have read is your paper about Kant and the critique of the problems from Kant. What?
It is a little known paper that I read in graduate school.
That was from 1998 or something.
Yeah. But can ethical intuitionism be connected to virtue ethics, like learning better intuitions almost?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would have an intuitionist view about virtue just as I do about the good and the right. Right? Like, how do we know what are the virtues? Like, courage is a virtue, and honesty is a virtue, and so on. How do we know that? And those are all based upon ethical intuition, like the other ethical judgments. I mean, what I think about virtue ethics more generally, like, I don't completely understand what virtue ethics is, and I'm not sure that word is used in a single sense. Okay, but sometimes it sounds like it's the view that you should figure out what is the right thing to do by thinking about what a virtuous person would do. Or like, this is the criterion of rightness, what a virtuous person would do. So I don't agree with that, right? But this doesn't have to do with intuitionism, like you could be an intuitionist virtue ethicist. I don't agree with that because I think, well, the virtuous person would have some way of deciding what to do, right? They themselves would have a way of deciding what to do. And it wouldn't be asking themselves what they themselves would do, Like they would decide what to do based upon some other reason besides what a virtuous person would do. So whatever their reason would be for what they do, that would be the actually correct reason, right? And not the fact that a virtuous person would do it. Do you see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So I was actually gonna, I remember what I was gonna ask, and that is, I've seen in I've read your paradox of weak deontology, why I'm not an objectivist. Read lots of these papers on normative ethics from you, and I haven't actually quite gathered what your normative position is. Do you hold a strict normative framework, or I haven't been. I gather you're probably somewhere like a broad consequentialist, but.
Well, so I think that I don't exactly know what the correct normative ethics is, but I'm more like a moderate deontologist, pluralistic, like W.D. Ross. So they're just a bunch of principles about what you should and shouldn't do that seem intuitively correct, and I think those are basically correct. Right? Like you shouldn't steal from people, you shouldn't attack people physically. Right, but also you can do some of these things that seem wrong if it's necessary to prevent some kind of disaster. Mm-hmm. But you can't do it just to prevent slightly worse consequences. Mm-hmm. So, you cannot kill an innocent person just to prevent someone else from killing 2 innocent people, but you can do it to prevent someone from killing 1 million. Right. Something like that, right? And why do I think that? Well, it's just you just get you have to balance intuition. Right? Mm-hmm. You get sort of counterintuitive consequences with either alternative.
Mm-hmm. So almost kind of like a bit of threshold deontology. There's okay. So I know in ethical intuitionism you say and I agree with this, usually intuitively in the organ harvest scenario people say don't do it. And the trolley scenario they say do it. What is there something about these two scenarios that is different that we're just missing? Why do you think it is that in one scenario we're okay with killing 1 to save 5, but in another scenario it intuitively seems wrong?
Yeah. So one thing people say is in the case where you harvest the organs, you're treating one person as a mere means, right? This is a Kantian answer. In the case of diverting the trolley, you're not treating the person as a means, right? Because the guy on the other track who's going to be run over, his presence is not instrumental. It's not useful at all. You wish that he wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And then, you would still save the car, okay? Now, I think that doesn't work with some other cases, but another answer that sounds better, this is from Judith Thompson, is there's a difference between originating a threat and diverting an existing threat. So it's easier to justify diverting an existing threat from one collection of victims to a smaller collection of victims than it is to justify creating a different threat. And so, so in the organ harvesting case, the doctor is creating a new threat, like being killed by your doctor. In the trolley problem, you're just diverting it's the same threat, it's the trolley. So you're just redistributing it.
Mm-hmm. I see. 1 second.
How did you get into libertarianism?
Let's see, I think it was mostly through Ayn Rand, right? It was mostly because of her novels. And, when I was in the beginning of college, a couple of people recommended Ayn Rand to me, and when the third person told me that I should read Ayn Rand, I was like, okay, fine, I'll read this thing, I guess. Actually, I think the first thing that I read was an excerpt from Atlas Shrugged about the Starnes Motor Company. It's a sort of sub-story that's in one of the chapters about what happened when this car company decided to adopt the motto from each according to his ability to each according to his needs. And then the story just tells what's going to happen, right? And when I read it, it sounded totally plausible that would happen, right? But what happens is basically, okay, so they have to have a committee or something to figure out what people's needs are and what people's abilities are, so that they can demand of everyone what they're able to give, right? And then, so obviously what's going to happen is then everybody tries to prove that they don't have abilities and that they have lots of needs. Right? And everybody tries to multiply their needs so that they get more stuff. And they try to reduce their abilities so that they don't have to give as much. and I mean, that's like the short version of it. But when you read it, it's like, there's more details and sort of like, you just sort of see how this is going to go, right? And, so like, that kind of convinced me of what was wrong with socialism, right? That's the problem with socialism. Right? You're going to reward people for like, basically the stuff that you don't want them to do. And you're going to penalize people for doing the stuff that you want them to do. This is not going to go well. But also, when I was in college, I also, Brian Kaplan went to UC Berkeley at the same time that I did. And he was in some philosophy classes, and so he introduced me to anarcho-capitalism, right? Which sort of like took me from being a mere libertarian to being an anarchist.
So, I feel like I've said this a lot, but I've read your paper on free will, and your minimum free will hypothesis, and as I understand it, you are some form of libertarian. You believe in some form of libertarian free will, or would you? Okay. So I kind of wanted to ask if one, I haven't read your book on skepticism yet. So would you consider yourself a dualist or a physicalist? Like.
Dualist, although that book doesn't say that.
Okay. Well, I just didn't know because I know you go into like direct and indirect realism and stuff, so I didn't know if you were. Do you hold that the physical world is necessarily deterministic, or do you believe that the physical world is also indeterministic in nature?
I mean, it's not necessarily deterministic. Is it deterministic? I don't think so, right? Because that would rule out free will, right? So, I mean, some of the things that you do freely involve like physical events, like body moving. So if the physical world is completely deterministic, then you wouldn't have any alternative possibilities, right? Now, like, I don't know how free will works, but I guess it has to do with what they call downward causation. I guess it has to be that your mind downward influences the microscopic events in your brain.
Right. So it sounds like you're proposing sort of like an agent causal theory as opposed to like an event causal. I don't know if you're like into the whole like free will thing, but I was going to ask about that if you were.
Maybe. So I mean, there are two ideas about how free will works, right? Two ideas that are unpopular among most philosophers, especially the naturalists, right? One of them is agent causation, and the other one is just that, like, well, mental states influence events in the brain. So the second thing doesn't require agent causes; they could be event causes. Mm-hmm. But you still have to have some story about, like, what makes them count as free. So anyway, I'm somewhat sympathetic to both of these, but also I think nobody actually understands it. Nobody understands it at all.
Right. So again, I'm sure that. Naive. Would it be just like your general to like phenomenon?
Substantive objection, right? To get a substantive reply. But probably if you think direct realism is overly simplistic or something, you probably don't understand what it is. Right? Which my experience is almost there are a bunch of people who think direct realism is ridiculous, and almost none of them understand what it is. They think that the view is some ridiculous thing. Right? They think I'm saying something else, which is why they think it's ridiculous. Like, they think I'm saying that there are no causal intermediaries between the distal object and the your awareness. Like, no, I'm not saying that. I'm not retarded.
Right.
Also, a view that I think is not stupid but not true is like the idea that there's no mental representation. So I'm not saying that, right? Like you're aware of the thing, but there's no internal mental state. I'm not saying that. There's an internal mental state, but the internal mental state that represents the object is not the object of awareness. Right? In other words, like when you see a table, you're not aware of the experience of the table. You're primarily aware of the table. You could, like, you have to do some sort of reflection in order to be aware of the quality of your mental state. But what you're like normally aware of, sort of naturally by the just natural functioning of your faculties, is the table. It's not that you don't have an experience of the table, it's that by having an experience, like that constitutes your awareness of the table.
Okay, cool. So I another one I had, and just to hop back, I guess, onto a little bit of a different subject, back to ethical intuitionism. As I've noticed, like one of the main objections people have to it is usually the argument from disagreement. And this is the one I hear most. This is the one, like when I'm talking to people, this is the first thing people talk about is they're like, well, how does this, count for moral disagreement? I think that you very thoroughly provide why there's plenty of explanation for an intuitionist to explain moral disagreement. And the other argument is usually like Mackey's like argument from queerness, or just moral truths are weird. Would you say that there are any strong opposition that you're aware of currently to non-naturalism in general, or intuitionism, that you think could be expanded upon from the non-naturalist camp?
Are there any strong arguments? I don't know. Not very strong. Maybe I should think harder about that, right? If I say that there are no strong arguments, then then you'll think that I'm dogmatic or something. Yeah, but like I haven't been impressed by any of them. So, it's like the main arguments that people say, like I'm not sure if they're people's actual reasons, but the main things people say are just leave me completely cold. I find them totally unpersuasive. Right. So it's like just saying, oh, it's weird. Yeah, I find that completely unpersuasive. I don't care if it's weird. Like, what is that? What kind of argument is that? It's weird. So weird things can't exist. Is that it? There's a lot of weird things that exist. I thought seriously about this sort of evolutionary argument, where people say, there's like not really a good reason why evolution would have given you a reliable faculty for detecting the moral facts, even if there are moral facts. Right? So, I spent some time thinking about that. Like, I don't think that's a stupid thing to think. But I do think, like, thinking about, based on phenomenal conservatism, thinking about how good the reason is for believing in moral facts versus how good is the argument against it, right? Like, I think the reason for believing in moral truths is extremely compelling. It's just like completely obvious that you shouldn't torture a baby for fun. Mm-hmm. And so, some of the objections that people give are in themselves sound reasonable, but they're just nowhere near as obvious as that, right?
Right. Okay, so I lost my train of thought again. I'm sorry. Does anybody else have something real quick?
Yeah, it's actually interesting. So I was going to ask you about the evolutionary argument, but that's okay. What's your view now that this debate is kind of settled down a little bit? What do you think about the contemporary companions and guild debates in metaphysics?
I mean, that's a good thing to mention, right? So I think a lot of the alleged problems with moral facts are also problems with epistemic facts, or even prudential facts, or like other facts about practical rationality in general. Right? So it's less plausible to doubt all of these things than to just doubt morality, right? Like, you thought that you were getting in for doubting things like, oh, I have a moral obligation to save children drowning ponds, you know. But when you think about what the arguments are for this, you know, you realize that you might be in for also doubting whether you have a reason to eat when you're hungry rather than just starving, or whether you have a reason to believe that 2 + 2 is 4, right? Because, you know, reasons are normative things, right? So, you know, like if you don't believe in any weird things, then reasons for belief are weird in the same sense. They're not
right.
Or whatever. Anyway, and some people just like, you know, go all out and say, yeah, that's right, there's no reasons for anything, including the thing that I just said. There was no reason for me to say that, right? Okay, so if you have that view, I think that's consistent, but it's also insane.
So I have a question about the supervenience of moral properties. So I have to admit, your book that I read was my first book on meta-ethics. But the way I understand it is that, and I loved it, by the way. I would consider myself thoroughly convinced. I think.
And everybody needs to go out and buy it right now.
Yep.
Ordering it right now.
I think that in everything I've read from you, you do a really good job of going through like all objections and being very, very thorough. I just read Problem of Political Authority to my friend, and he went from like liberal to potentially libertarian anarchist in like the course of 4 days. So the way I understand it is that although that moral properties cannot be reduced to natural properties, that a moral property can supervene on a natural property. Like, so take Hitler, for example. The property of killing 6 million people has the property of being bad. Am I understanding supervenience correctly?
Yeah, right. So, I mean, the supervenience principle is there can't be a moral difference between two things unless there's some descriptive difference that explains why they differ morally. So, like, there can't be two actions where one of them is right and the other one is wrong, and there's no factual explanation. Like, there's no explanation of how they differ from each other that would explain why one of them is right and one of them is wrong. That can't be right. That's the supervenience principle. Okay. Right, so, yeah, so if Hitler was evil, there had to be some non-moral facts about him that explained why he was evil. Right? You know, what was evil about him.
Right. Okay. And I know that as far as I'm aware, you don't consider yourself a skeptic of any kind, which includes inductive skepticism. And I know that you employ like sort of like a Bayesian probability, or Bayesian probability, as far as like empirical facts to try like as a way of like. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I'm not really like I consider myself an inductive skeptic. I think that probability theories we kind of get into like just trying to reconcile what will happen in the future based off of like the percentage of like it's happening in the past. Could you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Okay. So we have this problem of induction, you know, where you're wondering why you should use inductive reasoning, or why the conclusions of inductive arguments are justified. There's a probabilistic approach to this, right? There's like a kind of Bayesian approach where you say, okay, so we get evidence and we just sort of update our beliefs by conditionalizing on the evidence, okay? And there's a problem for that, prima facie, which is, well, it kind of depends upon what your initial probability distribution is. So you observe a bunch of ravens, and all the ones you observe are black, and then you want to know what's the probability that the next one you observe will be black. Okay, and you could say, yeah, you know, the probability is 50%. You could say no matter how many you observe, the probability is 50%. Maybe I should have a better example, because black isn't half of the color space. Okay, but just pretend that the color black occupies half of the color solid. So okay, there's a higher probability of 1/2 that any object will be black. And then, okay, you observe a whole bunch.
We live in monochrome. There's only black and white, right? Like,
yeah. You know, you have a black and white worldview, just like I am.
Okay.
So, Okay, so the initial probability of any randomly chosen object being black is 50%. And then, so you start observing ravens, and like you observe 1,000 of them randomly chosen from everywhere in the world, and like all of them are black. Now, what's the probability that the next one you see is going to be black? Okay, and you should say it's high, close to 1. You could say, like maybe David Hume would say, no, it's still 50%. Right? You don't learn from experience at all. Okay, there's a philosophical, so on the face of it, the Humean answer is crazy. It's not 50%. It's right. It's much more likely now that the next one will be black. But there's a philosophical problem because there is actually like there's a sort of argument that you could give that it should be 50%, right? Which goes something like this. So, well, think about the sequence of ravens that you observe, and just imagine every logically possible distributing black and white across this sequence of observations. And imagine that you assign an equal probability to every possible way of distributing black and white attributes across all of the observations. Okay, that has the result that the probability of the next thing that you observe being black is always 50%, no matter what. Right? Because right, it's so, the number of, so I've observed 1,000 ravens, I'm going to observe another one. So the number of cases where the 1,001st is black and the first 1,000 are black is equal to the number where the 1,001st is white and the first 1,000 are black. There's exactly one possible sequence with each of those results. So you could say that each of those are 50% likely.
Right.
And so there's a traditional alternative, which is, no, you don't assign an equal probability to every possible way of distributing the properties across observations. You assign equal probabilities to each possible proportion of blackness that could be in the population. Right, so, like they could be, ravens could be half black and half white, or they could be 60% black and 60% white. Okay, more precisely, you give a uniform probability density, if you know what that means, which is the version of that takes account of having a continuum of possibilities. Okay, and if you do that, then you get inductive reasoning. Okay, so after observing 1,000 black ravens, now the probability of the next one being black is going to be 1,001 over 1,002. Okay, explaining why it's that exactly requires doing a little bit of calculus, which I probably shouldn't try to do verbally, but you can sort of intuitively see, because by Bayesian reasoning, if there's an equal probability of each possible proportion, like, well, you're confirming that the proportion in the total population must be high. Like, that would explain why you keep observing black ones. But if the proportion in the total population is high, then probably the next one you observe is going to be black. Right? That's basically what happens. Okay, so that's like a very short version, right? Right. To say about that.
Yeah. Would you have any recommended literature on this specific topic? I'm not a big stats guy. I need to take some, need to do some learning on statistics in general. But would you have anything that comes to mind that you would recommend to pick up on this topic?
I mean, I have a paper on Induction, and now I'm trying to remember the name of it. Explanationist aid for the
yes.
project or something like that. It's a little bit technical because it does that calculus stuff where you give the proof. But the idea is inference is the best explanation. But I'm going to give a probabilistic version of it. Right.
Right.
I'm going to give a view that sort of like explains how by doing inference the best explanation, and you're also doing the correct Bayesian reasoning.
Right. I think I tried to read that paper one time, and it was way over my head because I'm not the best at math. I guess that's why I like Austrian economics. I'm not good at math. But so I guess this would be like a decent segue into like your opinions on like Popper's falsificationism, as well as like Thomas Kuhn's, like I forget what his thing is called, but like their response, or like responses, I guess, to the problem of induction. And like
quickly before you answer, Huemer has a paper in a book on evidentialism in which he gives a probabilistic critique of evidentialism. Maybe you could check that out. I think you'll like that.
Is that the Believing in Accordance with Evidence book you sent me?
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, he has an essay in there.
All right.
Although, you know, not about induction, that paper, but anyway. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, these other philosophers of science that you mentioned, Popper and Kuhn, are insane. Now, it might seem like I say that a lot, but that's because there are a lot of insane ideas in philosophy, right? So I think inductive skepticism is insane. Now, you know, okay, it sounds uncharitable, but, you know, like, it implies that, for example, okay, I have no reason at all to think that if I drop this, it's going to fall down rather than going up or sideways or turning into a bird and flying away, turning into a dragon and eating me. Like, the inductive skeptic says there's no reason at all to think that this thing falling down when I drop it is more likely than any other thing that could happen, right? Just as likely to turn into a dragon and eat me.
Right.
That's insane. If you think that, I don't know how you're going to get through life. Okay. Popper had an important idea about falsification, right? Like, he had this idea that what distinguishes a scientific theory from an unscientific theory is falsifiability. And there's something very right in that and important, but Popper himself didn't understand what was right and important in it, because he didn't like probabilism. He didn't like Bayesianism. And Bayesianism gives the correct explanation of why falsification is important. Okay, but he totally rejects Bayesianism, so he can't give the correct explanation. So he just asserts it, right? Just asserts that this falsification thing is important, but doesn't explain why. Okay, why falsification is important is basically that, okay, so first, the correct version of it isn't really falsification. The correct version of it is disconfirmation or lowering the probability. So it's important for a theory to be capable of a test that will either raise or lower its probability. If there's nothing that you can do that you would accept as lowering the probability of your theory, then it's unscientific. Okay, why does that matter? Because it's just like a theorem of probability, that if there's no evidence that would lower the probability of a theory, then there's also no evidence that would raise the probability of that theory. All right, so like E lowers the probability of H, if and only if not, E raises the probability of H. So if you can't have evidence against it, then you can't have evidence for it. Right, so in my view, that's the reason why it matters. If there's if you have the theory where there's no way of collecting evidence against it, that means that you don't have any evidence for it either, because you can't have any evidence for it, right? And that's what's wrong with those theories. There's no reason to believe them, right? Because there couldn't be evidence for them.
Gotcha. Cool. So anybody else want to ask anything real quick?
Yeah. As someone who studies law, and I think I want to be a lawyer. Obviously, I'm very excited for your book that's coming out this year, on law and stuff. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what it means to be an ethical lawyer. What if I'm going to be a lawyer? What sort of lawyer do you think I should be?
Yeah, it's probably hard. Right? It'd be hard to be an ethical lawyer. So the forthcoming book is Justice Before the Law, which will hopefully come out in June or thereabouts, and all listeners should buy it. You can pre-order it, I think. So, I mean, I have this thing that I think that it's morally wrong to pursue an unjust outcome. So, you know, you're working on a case. I think it's wrong to pursue the outcome that you think is unjust. Like trying to win a lawsuit where you think that the lawsuit is not actually meritorious, right? Or trying to force the other side to give you money that you don't think your client is actually owed, or you know, or the reverse, or like trying to defend a guilty client and get the client acquitted. But also, obviously, it's wrong to prosecute someone that you think is innocent, right? Also, I think it's wrong to prosecute someone who you think is guilty, but the law itself is unjust. Like that thing shouldn't be a crime. Like there's a whole bunch of things I think are morally wrong that lawyers do all the time, which might be like job requirements. And the fact that they're job requirements doesn't mean that they're not morally wrong. That being said, I don't think it's impossible. Like it's not impossible to be an ethical lawyer, but it's going to be hard. You shouldn't defend people who, well, it's ethical to defend people from punishments that they don't deserve to get. But I think it's unethical to defend people from punishments that they do deserve. Right, like trying to stop them from getting what they deserve. So, you might say, yeah, I'm only going to represent people who are right. Or, or at minimum, they're more right than the other side. They don't have to be totally right. The other side is trying to do something that's unjust, and I'm going to try to stop that. Right? Like that's ethical, but I'm not sure if you can make it just doing that. This reminds me that, rambling for a little bit, this reminds me that I heard a lecture by Randy Barnett once. And Randy Barnett, he's a libertarian, but he also used to be an assistant state's attorney. And he basically said that he refused to do drug cases because he thought that the law was wrong. And that was okay at that time. But he also said that today he wouldn't be able to do that. Like they would fire him. Right? So I'm not sure how it would work out.
So go ahead, Sam.
No, I was just going to say, you have an interesting opinion. There's a lot of legal theorists who even do things like, defend murderers, even if you think that the person is guilty and stuff. There's a lot of people who, almost everyone kind of holds those opinions. But given that you touched a little bit on the philosophy of science, I thought I'd ask you about the kind of, given you're an anarchist, the anarchist of philosophy of science, Feyerabend. I'm not quite sure how you say his name. I didn't know if you had read him or if you had any opinions on it.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing.
The philosopher of science, Feyerabend.
Oh, Feyerabend.
Yeah, that's it. I don't know how to say his name.
He was funny. Coincidentally, he was the professor for the ancient history of philosophy class that I took at Berkeley. Right? When I first arrived there, I took this, whatever it was, Philosophy 25A, History of Philosophy Ancient. Feyerabend was the lecturer, and he would sit at the front of the room. He was just like sitting on the stage, kind of just like rambling, right, for the whole class. And he was such a rambler that we never got to Aristotle. Like he spent all this time talking about the pre-Socratics, and he didn't have time to get to Aristotle at the end. And he would be talking about relativism all the time. So he was crazy, right? And you would expect that from his views on philosophy of science, right? So I'm a political anarchist. I'm not a epistemological anarchist, right? That's crazy. So, by the way, here's another anecdote, right? So when I was there, the TA told me that the TAs have to assign the grades because Feyerabend is not allowed to assign grades anymore. And the reason for that is that he would write A at the top of the grade sheet and an arrow going all the way down. To just like give everyone A automatically. There was one time when the student died during the semester and he still got an A. Right?
That's amazing. That's amazing.
You know what? And Feyerabend said, well, he would have gotten an A. So.
That's amazing because apparently Ludwig von Mises also used to give all of his students A's, so I find that quite fun. But if you've got a question now,
so I forgot what I was going to ask earlier too. I remember now. But, I actually wanted to, I guess to kind of segue, just ask kind of you reminded me of something. I think we're going to have a different answer here. Who is your favorite pre-Socratic?
I don't know. Parmenides, maybe?
Mine is Zeno, and I thought you wouldn't like that because Zeno was very, very skeptical about things. But the question I was going to ask you is, do you think that there is a legitimate legal action in an anarchist society to stop factory farming from happening? Is it just a personal disposition against it, or do you think that there can be force used against people to prevent this factory farming? Basically, everybody has to either, be a vegan or grow their own or farm their own food or whatever.
Yeah. So I think it's morally justified if it's feasible, right? Now, in actual fact, if the government passed that law now, I don't think that it's feasible because there are too many meat eaters, right? So I think people would just be, it would be massive like violation of the law, like with the drug laws.
Right.
But if it would actually work, I think it's justified. Now, would it actually happen in an anarchist society? I don't think it would.
Right.
Because I don't think that because it's for the benefit of the animals, but the animals don't have enough power. Like the animals are not going to hire a protection agency or anything. They don't know how. So they're going to be unprotected. So, you know, this could be like an argument in favor of government, right? Because no government would do this. Okay, but also the government could also just be like subsidizing the meat industry, which is what they're actually doing, right? Now, you know, okay, why would that be justified? Well, I mean, I just think that it's horribly immoral. Like, factory farming is just horribly immoral, and you know, it's like I think it's literally causing more suffering, like every few years, more suffering than the total amount of suffering endured by all of human history. And I think that's a plausible estimate. It might sound like an extreme statement, but if you just like kind of do the math, it's totally plausible. That's true. Right, so it's something like 74 billion animals a year. And almost all of them are on factory farms. Okay, that's how many animals are slaughtered worldwide per year. And the total number of humans who ever existed is like around 110 billion. Right, so a couple of years of factory farming tortures and then kills more animals than the total number of humans who ever existed. And you know, most of them suffered horribly before they died. So like it's just such a colossal harm, right? It's like greater than all harms endured by all humans ever. So if you could stop that, you know, by passing a law, you should.
So I haven't read your dialogues on ethical veganism or vegetarianism, so maybe you address that in there. And I know you talk a bit about it in ethical intuitionism. You're like nobody objects to like the fact that animals feel pain and animals this. What would your response to people who think that ethical consideration for something requires that it is a rational being, a volitional being?
Yeah, I mean, first, so that's two distinct things, right? Like, I guess having free will versus having intelligence. I mean, first, I have no idea why that's supposed to be true. Like, so if you're dumb, then your pain isn't bad. I don't know why that would be true. And, you know, second, I think that implies that it's okay to torture babies, right? Because they're not smart.
Well, I think that the argument there would be that I think we're operating off of different versions of the word rational. When I say rational, I just mean generally they are a volitional being, not necessarily they're well informed in all of their actions, but just that they are a volitional being. And in regards to babies, I don't hold that babies are rational. I hold that we come to rationality. However, babies do have they have a natural capacity to becoming a volitional being. They will become volitional at some point if we just let them. So they would receive ethical consideration because they have that natural capacity.
I mean, first, again, I have no idea why the capacity matters rather than actuality. Second, I think this implies that if it's a mentally retarded baby, then you can torture it. Or just a mentally retarded person, you can torture them because they're never going to become rational, right? Or intelligent. And yeah, that seems horrible.
Okay. I was just interested to hear what that would be, because that's usually what a lot of people say is, well, I mean, yeah, you know, we are killing animals, but they put humans above animals, or they don't think they deserve ethical consideration. I'm not a vegan or a vegetarianism. Maybe I'll be persuaded. I've been persuaded by 2 of your books so far, so maybe a third.
Yeah, it's a good book, Dialogues on Ethical Vegetarianism. You can get it on Amazon also. So you know, here's a small thought experiment that I got from my colleague David Barnett many years ago. So you have 2 people who have headaches, and you know you have like one Advil, which is going to relieve the headache, and assume that you can't divide it. Okay, so you're going to give the Advil to someone, right? And then like you find out that one of them has a higher IQ than the other one. So true or false, you got to give it to the guy with a higher IQ because his pain is worse just because he's smart. Does that seem right? Like, that just strikes me as totally arbitrary. What do you mean? Like, just because he's smart doesn't mean that his pain is worse or whatever.
Okay, how about this? What about awareness? So I think a lot of people would make the argument that awareness presupposes consciousness. Well, now I think like there are really intelligent animals that could potentially be self-aware, maybe dolphins. But I don't think that all animals are necessarily self-aware. So while we might say don't take me for kicking dogs, but say if I kick a dog and I see him react in a certain way, I might see this as a strictly physiological response, but kind of like qualia. Or do they actually have the experience? Are they aware of this pain, or is it just a physiological response that we're observing?
I mean, so there's awareness and self-awareness. I mean, if you think that, the animals don't actually have any experiences, they're just like mindless mechanisms, then, then it'd be fine to do whatever, right? But, that's kind of a crazy view, right? I mean, I think basically no one thinks that, or no student of animal psychology thinks that would be true. And okay, why do we think that animals have experiences? So they have brains, and stuff can happen to their brains that's like what happens to your brain when you're in pain. Also, when stuff happens to the animal that would cause pain in you, like stuff happens to their nerves, that happens to your nerves, and then they behave the way that you would behave, right? Except for talking. They don't say ouch, right? But they might scream and try to get away from the things causing them pain. Just really looks a lot like they're having these experiences. Okay, you might think, there's having the experience and then there's sort of being self-aware. Now, I don't know if there's such a thing as an unconscious pain. I guess not, right? I don't think there could be a completely unconscious pain. But maybe there could be different degrees of awareness. So, maybe humans are more aware of their experiences than non-human animals.
That was kind of my next segue is like, so say there's 110 billion people who have existed in human history, and in the past few years we've killed more animals than that. Like, how do we, there's no unit of suffering, and even if there were, how do we intersubjectively compare that, not only between people, but between entirely different species? Like, how do we quantify, this suffering? I guess that would be...
I mean, actually, this sounds like a thing that an Austrian economist would say, right?
Well, I have my roots.
There's no way of comparing them, right? Well, like if the question is how do you make a precise measurement of suffering? Well, we don't have a way of doing that, right? But that's not necessary. So you could say that about other people also, right? So like, if I punch you, I don't know exactly how much pain you're going to experience, but I still shouldn't do it. Like I have good reason to think there's going to be some pain, and it's not going to be a complete trivial amount, so I shouldn't do it. Right? Even though I can't exactly measure it, right? And but it's like if the amount of suffering that the animal has was like 1/billionth of the amount that you would have, then you could say, it's justified to keep doing this stuff, right? Because it's like a trivial amount of pain, okay?
Right.
So that's not plausible, right?
Yeah. So the only distinction I would draw here is that I don't necessarily hold me punching somebody in the face to be bad because it causes pain. I would say like punching somebody in the face is bad because I think they have I guess in your words, a prima facie right of self-ownership, not to have them interfered with. It's not necessarily that I'm concerned about the outcome of me punching them in the face, but I would be exhibiting that I think that I have the right to control their scarce resources, and that somehow trumps their own bodily right. And just in like regards to intuition, like I grew up in like a gun-loving household, so I would never even think of pointing like a toy gun at somebody. However, if I go out and hunt, I don't see anything. I don't feel intuitively that there's anything wrong with me shooting and killing a deer. Like that intuition just doesn't seem to be there for me.
Yeah. And so, about causing pain, you can take an example where you wouldn't do something because of causing pain, right? So, you wouldn't go up to a person on the street who's overweight and say, "You're a big, fat, ugly kid," whatever, because that would cause them a negative experience, even though it's not violating their rights, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And again, like the point stands that you don't have to know exactly how much pain it's going to cause. You don't have to be able to measure it, like measurements. Then I forgot what the other point was after that.
Oh, it was just I don't necessarily know if I ascribe the same, like I don't feel like I ascribe the same value. No, I wouldn't kill my dog because I feel like I have a personal connection with my dog. I wouldn't hurt my dog. But if I go out and I'm hunting deer or dove or ducks or whatever, there's not that sensation, this intuition that it's wrong for me to. Now I would hold that I think sport hunting is more wrong than hunting for like you go out and you hunt and then you eat the deer. I think that you shouldn't go out and kill animals purely for some sort of satisfaction. I do think that is wrong. But I don't.
I mean, this is pointing out that your ethical judgments shouldn't be completely intuitive. But not every ethical judgment is intuitive. You have to do some kind of reasoning, and sometimes the reasoning is kind of looking at consistency with other ethical judgments, right? So, like, if it would be wrong to kill your dog just for the heck of it, and then there's this deer that's kind of like the dog. Like, he's about as smart as the dog. I don't know if they are, but anyway, let's say.
Right.
And you don't feel bad about killing a deer, but, you can reason that it's probably wrong also. Now, as you say, I think it's a lot better to kill for food than it is to kill just for fun. Like, if you're killing just because it's fun to kill, that seems like really not.
Yeah.
Virtue there.
Yeah.
If you're killing to eat, if you need the food to eat, that's justified. You have to stay alive. But if you're killing and then you're eating it, I mean, you should sort of ask, okay, but why am I choosing this way of getting food? Because I have other ways of getting food that don't require me to kill anyone. Don't require me to kill any other living animals that might be sentient. If you're choosing that way of getting food because it's more fun, that is kind of like, yeah, I'm killing for fun.
Okay. I wasn't trying to like press you on that or anything. I mean, obviously, like these are just general questions that come to my mind. So as long as we've got you here, I wanted to ask the man himself. So I've been talking for a while. Does anybody else have a?
Yeah, I have a question. How, well, because we were talking about veganism and all this stuff. What is your views on abortion then?
So I don't know, and basically nobody knows if fetuses have rights. I think a lot of people think they know. Also, I think if you don't know whether they have rights, you should probably not kill them, unless you have like a really good reason, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like if your life is in danger, and you're not sure if this thing has rights, then kill it, right? But if it's just like, well, I'm not ready to have a child right now, that's probably not a good enough reason. So I'm not sure whether, or I'm not sure when fetuses become sentient even, right? I assume they become sentient at some point before birth, I assume, but I'm not sure when. I'm also not sure whether the fetus counts as sort of the same conscious being as the adult person who's later going to exist. Right, so I'm not sure whether it count, like, if you killed the fetus that I came from, I'm not sure whether that would have been killing me.
Yeah.
I think like that might make a difference to whether it counted as murder or not.
So I was gonna ask, so obviously, like, I think you would probably say, well, it's one step closer to in the right direction, but not quite there. But what are your thoughts on like pescatarianism?
Yes, what you just said.
Okay.
So it's a step in the right direction. You're not quite there. There is some.
Yeah, I just wanted to. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, like, there's an argument about whether fish can feel pain. There's like an article that says that fish don't feel pain, and then other people say, yes they do. And the argument is basically, okay, so if something happens to your, if like your pain sensing nerve endings get stimulated, but the signal somehow does not reach your neocortex in your brain, then you will say that you don't feel any pain. Okay, and so the inference is that you don't feel any pain. The fish does not have a neocortex, and so there's an inference there that maybe they can't feel pain at all. However, they do have pain behavior, like they act like they're in pain at some times, and that behavior can be reduced by giving them anesthetics and stuff like that. So there's some evidence they do feel pain. So like it's not as bad as like killing mammals or whatever who for sure feel pain. Yeah.
First off, I would like to say that it's a pleasure to attend a Zoom meeting with Dr. Huemer. And I haven't read much of your work, so I apologize, or please do tell me if you have written on this before. I would love to read about it, but what do you make of the property rights of artificial intelligence? Let's say that some kind of AI, it has some kind of volition. What would you make of the property rights of AI in a libertarian society, in a futuristic, anarchist libertarian society?
Yeah, I mean, that would become a hard case because the AI would live in something that another person owns, right? Like it would live in a computer. The computer would be the property of like a biological person. Fortunately, I don't think that this will arise because I don't think that AI can be conscious. I know like a lot of people think that AI will just have like the same mental states, just in exactly the same sense that we have mental states. They'll have thoughts and feelings and sensations and whatever. But so basically I'm persuaded by the Searle Chinese room argument and things like this. And so I just think there's basically no reason to think that they would have any mental states at all. Okay, but like this is an unpopular view. Almost everyone who studies AI thinks that it will be conscious or whatever.
I guess on this topic, I think that if I'm correct, I could be wrong. You're in disagreement with a lot of libertarians on this, and that is the topic of intellectual property. If I'm not mistaken, you do believe that there can be some degree of intellectual property.
I mean, I don't know, but so is there a libertarian position on that?
So I would say the general position is that ownership requires scarce resources because ownership is about resolving conflict between scarce resources. Ideas are not scarce, so they cannot be owned. And if you owned ideas, say you owned the words in this book, if I were to read this book to somebody and out loud, and that would be an infringement of your intellectual property right. What's actually here is you're actually controlling my body. You're saying I'm not allowed to speak certain words because you put them in this order on this piece of paper.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, property rights in general place restrictions on other people's bodies because there are rights to exclude other people from certain areas and doing certain things with physical objects. But okay, but anyway, but in this case, you could restrict somebody doing something with their own body. But I mean, yeah. So I mean, I think there are two reasons why we have property rights. Okay, actually, like the foundation of property rights is not very well established. Not like there's not like a really clear, compelling answer to why property rights exist. But there's this. There's like sort of rural utilitarian type reasons why we have property rights. Okay. So, you know, one thing is that you mentioned that there's competition over scarce resources. So there are, you know, physical goods that are rivalrous, i.e., if one use is made, that prevents other uses that somebody might want to do. Okay. But another thing about property is that it rewards productive activity. Right? So, like, one of the reasons why we have property is, well, if nobody has property rights, then nobody's going to do any work. Like if I don't get to keep the food when I grow food on the land, people are not going to grow food, then they're going to starve. Okay, so you can make this sort of rural utilitarian argument, and now, like, okay, so one of the rationales is satisfied by intellectual property, like it encourages people to do the valuable work, and the other one is not. Right? It's not necessary for preventing a conflict over the distribution of the scarce resource because it's not scarce. It can be reproduced. So then what?
So I'm not really even convinced on the utilitarian side of the argument. I think there's a lot of literature out here on things like especially patent laws and stuff like this, actually restricting competition, restricting innovation, things like this. I think that Stephan Kinsella is the best on this. I haven't read all of his work, but he does make in stipulations like, okay, if you write a book, you can stipulate in the book that people aren't allowed to reproduce it. But then he gets into like, well, if that book was abandoned and somebody else found it, well, they didn't sign that contract. So you get into like all this weird mind games about how it's really impossible to completely stop people from reproducing. But he does get into like, okay, like you could establish your J.K. Rowling's had written books before. She could set up some sort of establishment that people would pay to read her books again. So I think there are when it comes to like artistic things, so music, books and stuff like this, it is a little bit more complicated because obviously like people don't want to write a book if somebody can literally just go copy and paste it into a Google Drive and change the name and say they wrote it. But then like in regard to like patent laws and stuff like this, I don't find it very compelling that it actually increases innovation or to secure people these intellectual property rights. That would just be like my basic position.
Yeah. So I mean, as you suggested, I think an alternative to claiming that there's intellectual property would be making agreements with people. So like when you sell the book, it comes with an agreement that you're not going to copy it to other people without permission or something. Okay? Right. And also that if you sell it to another person, you will sell it with this same clause attached.
Right. Right.
Okay. And so, one of my thoughts is, well, if you can achieve the same result as intellectual property with contracts, let's just, then we should act like there's intellectual property, just like assume that that's what the person intended. But about patents, I mean, I think a problem is there are sort of predatory patents, right, where you didn't actually come up with a new thing, right? Or like you came up with some idea and then you got the government to give you a patent on it, but it's something like that many people are going to come up with independently. And so there's somebody who came up with this idea independently, so they did not rely on your labor. But now you're stopping them from using the idea, right? And there are actually these patent trolls who patent a bunch of stuff which they have no intention of ever doing. And they do this just so that they can get payouts from people who will do it, right? And they're waiting for somebody to infringe their patent without knowing about it, which means they're specifically relying on the fact that it's a bogus patent, basically. They're relying on the fact that people are going to come up with this idea independently, which means they're relying on the fact that this patent shouldn't exist, right? I mean, the patent should only exist if it's totally implausible that somebody would have come up with this without relying on you. right? Like you discovered it, and it's something that's specific enough that nobody's going to discover it if it's not, like if they didn't get it from you. Or at least not for a while, right? Probably not for the term of the patent. So I don't know if that satisfies you or makes you happier.
Oh no, I mean I just want to hear your opinions on it. Me personally, I still believe that like necessarily to have ownership there has to be a scarce resource, but I just love hearing like alternative opinions and stuff like that. So yeah, I do agree that with a lot of things like well, music is like, I think music and books and things like this are going to get torrented anyways. However, I think that we can establish, like, I think most of the time, if you really like a book or you really like an author, that people want to support that book or author, and so they are willing to actually pay for the stuff. Like I can get any book I want about Austrian economics for free off of Mises.org legally, but I still own like 30 books because I well, one, like to have the physical copy, and two, like to support them. So I think that there is the argument to be made that a lot of quasi-intellectual property can be passed through like contractually. I do think that there would still be like slips in this to where this like Kinsella points out, like if you leave the book on a bench, somebody picks up the book and they didn't sign the contract, could they replicate it, whatever. So you have like these scenarios that would seem to fall outside of the realms of contractual agreement and things like this. But ultimately I don't think you can own intellect, as in like because it's not a scarce thing, I don't think. But
I have a question. Are you optimistic about like libertarianism and liberty in the future?
So I guess that I am. I mean, generally, yes. And the reason for this is over history, things have gotten a lot better in a lot of ways. So libertarians are commonly very pessimistic and talk about how the government is expanding all this. There are some ways in which this is true, like if you look at the length of the Code of Federal Regulations, right, just like ballooning since it was started around 1920. But also you have to think about some other big changes that have gone in the direction of liberty. So we used to have slavery. Most societies throughout history have had slavery. That's pretty big. For the beginning part of my life, it was during the Cold War. We were worried about communism taking over the world, right? And then, the communist system collapsed around 1990 when I was in college, right? So like that's a huge move in the direction of freedom for humanity in general, right? It's true that America's been getting more regulations since then, but like that kind of outweighs a whole lot, right? Also part of why I'm optimistic is that I think people learn stuff over time, like humanity learns stuff over time. I think libertarianism is true, so I think that belief in it is going to expand, right? Due to its being true and having better arguments on itself.
That's actually something I wanted to ask you about. You mentioned that right at the end of Problems of Political Authority, about true ideas spreading and things like this. It's almost kind of like a bit of a dialectical view. Would you agree with that? That it's kind of like it's almost like this view of like we will have like this these ideas. There can be good ideas and bad ideas, and they progress throughout the course of society, and eventually the good ideas will win out and will reach like the correct society. Would you agree with that? It almost seems like a bit like dialectical to me.
Yeah, I mean, without the contradiction, right? Like I don't think it's going to turn out that we reconcile PMP with each other.
Right.
But I should say, like, I don't think it's inevitable. Like we could fuck things up. And I'm not certain, like, stuff has been getting better dramatically over the past couple thousand years, but I'm not certain that there's not a point at which it suddenly turns around. I'm not certain that we're not going to kill ourselves. Maybe, in the last few years, I've become more pessimistic about America specifically because I see our intellectual culture deteriorating. It seems like there's sort of this rise of just a bunch of negative emotion, and like the way that we interact with each other is like attacking each other. Partly insulting each other and also partly just like attacking people in their personal life because you disagree with them. That's like a big negative, right? If we don't stop that, I don't know how we're going to have more progress.
Yeah, maybe we should all just move to Liechtenstein.
Yes, I'm totally for it. I'm totally for it. Yeah, I was about to ask, like, do you have any like specific areas that in the world right now that you think are flourishing in the movement towards liberty?
I don't know. Like I have to collect a lot more information to find that. Yeah, I've heard libertarians proposing like seasteading. Like we should build a libertarian community out in the ocean.
Yeah.
And I have no idea if that would work. Like I'm not dismissing it, but I'm not going to join it until it's already flourishing. Right? I'm not going to be one of the first joiners because I'm not going to risk ruining my life and everything. I hope that works. Right.
Can I ask a question about veganism? I can go back to veganism. It's a question concerning a conflict between, say, your anarchist libertarian views and your veganist views. So, say for example, in one hypothetical, let's say it's either we have a society in which society completely stays the same, but the government cracks down and, well, assuming that it works, no one ever eats meat ever again. So the entire animal agriculture industry is completely absolved, or you have an anarchist society and people keep eating meat. I'm also a vegan, and I was asked this question, and I was a bit stunted by it. So I'm curious what your take on it is.
Yeah, which one is better? Probably the first one, right?
Yeah, but you can take it a lot further. You can get to militant veganism quite fast. That makes me, reconsider my priorities.
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't know what exactly is the tipping point, but it does seem to me like, the harm of factory farming is greater than all the harm done by the government, because it's greater than all the harm suffered by humans from all causes. Like, that's plausible, right? Just because the number of animals is like, many times greater than the number of humans. Right, but that being said, there would be some point at which you would say, oh yeah, we're going to. There would be some point at which the amount of harm to humans could exceed the harm that we're doing to animals.
Yeah, I found your recent little Walter Block on veganism particularly amusing. I found your really condescending language in response to Block quite appropriate.
I felt bad beating up on Walter, but
I love Block to pieces. I love him to pieces, but I think he went a little bit unhinged there. Just a very quite a general question. What do you think the legacy of Lawrence BonJour is going to be going forward, especially with his anti-foundationalism? Of course he has his very his most famous book, critiquing empiricism and establishing moderate rationalism. But what do you think people are going to think of Lawrence BonJour 20, 30 years from now?
I assume he's still going to be one of the key sources of coherentism, even though he abandoned it, and rationalism. For that book on that subject, In Defense of Pure Reason, which I agree with, unlike the other one. But we should kind of recognize how short the fashions are in philosophy, right? So think about how many philosophers who were writing in 1950 do we still talk about? Okay, so think about the philosophers who were on the faculty at Harvard in 1950. Go look them up and see how many of them you recognize. And it's going to be not most of them, right? It's going to be like, there's like a couple of people. And there were hundreds of philosophers, right? Always hundreds of philosophers. The ones who wrote, 1950 and before, almost none of them are we talking about anymore. So that's going to happen to most of the philosophers too.
So, you did put an excerpt of one of your books in your anthology on epistemology, and I know you consider yourself a foundationalist. So what are your general thoughts on Susan Haack's Voluntaryism?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding of that is Voluntaryism is foundationalism. So in other words, I don't think that foundationalists disagree. I don't think any self-described foundationalist is going to disagree that coherence can increase the justification for belief. Okay, like you have some beliefs that have some foundational justification, and then you find out that they support each other. That increases their justification. Like no foundationalist disagrees with that. So I think foundationalism just is Voluntaryism. Just like it's just a new word, right?
Okay, cool. I wanted to ask you a question about in regards to animal rights. Say we have these animals that seem to have some like beavers build a beaver dam, and say this beaver dam is built on your property. Would this do animals have like some sense of property rights? Would it be wrong for me to go in and destroy this beaver dam? Is that their beaver dam?
I mean, it's wrong to destroy it without a good reason. But is it a property rights violation? I mean, I guess not. I'm not sure.
I don't know. I know it's like a weird question, but I just I think the idea of animal rights opens up a lot of weird. Okay, so like you have monkeys occupying a forest, or animals occupying this land. Say it's open land, and you want to go in and homestead this land. Obviously, you homesteading this land would displace certain animals, and obviously that's going to harm them. I feel like just like the existence of humans is a harm to animals. The existence of property potentially is property. If we build on this property, displaces animals. If we cut down trees, it displaces animals. But these are all necessary things for humans, and typically held in the libertarian view that, I mean, if you homestead this land, you have a right to go cut down that tree and things like this.
So I mean, the reason why animals would lack property rights might be that it has to do with their mental capacity, right? Like they can't really exactly claim property, right? They don't have the understanding of property rights and stuff like that. I have some sympathy with the view that Robert Nozick suggested, just like briefly in passing, the utilitarianism for animals and Kantianism for humans, right? Which is you could do stuff that's harmful to the animal if it produces a greater total benefit. Now, it just happens that most of the stuff that we do that harms animals does not produce a greater benefit. Like most of the time, we just produce harms that are like 1,000 times greater than the benefit, but we don't care because we're assholes, okay? But if the benefit is greater than the harm, you can do it. But if you're harming a human, then the benefit, it's not enough that the benefit is greater than the harm. It's got to be at least many times greater. Right, because this stuff I was saying earlier about, the rights are not absolute. In my view, talk about rights, like this is a good foundational question to think about. Like, what is a right anyway? Why are there any such things, right? And in my view, there isn't a thing that the word right refers to. There's not a thing that you have. Like, I don't have a right somewhere around me, but rather when we say you have a right to X, that's short for a longer description about what is or isn't morally permissible for someone to do. So like, I have a property right in this land is short for saying, like other people have a moral obligation to refrain from using or damaging the land without my permission, and they're only allowed to do it if like they would have to be producing vastly greater benefits or something like that, right? So there's like this complicated description of what other people are and aren't allowed to do. All that is just what it means to say that there's a property right.
Okay. I guess that provides a pretty good answer. I was just curious because, like I said, I think you did a good job answering. I would say it's just what my mind immediately goes to when we kind of walk away from absolutism is all these I can I think of all these abstractions or all these like potential reductios, I guess you could say. Well, it's like if this were true, can't we apply it to this? And so that's just like where my mind goes with that type of thing. So I'm like, well, if we value animals in this degree, does that mean that property ownership and cutting down a forest or like without good if I have a good reason to cut down the forest, but would the animals living in the forest trump this good reason to cut down the forest and things like that? So that's kind of just like where my mind goes. So
yeah, I mean, so like I don't know, but I would guess that it's okay to cut down the forest if you're producing a greater benefit total, right?
Okay.
Including all of the beings that are affected.
Okay. I mean I don't know how long how long you've got. We've already been here for 2 hours. This has been amazing. I don't know if like you've got a time limit or anything. I didn't know if you were we're holding you up or anything. So I just.
I mean, I can stay if you have more questions. You know, I don't have to be any specific place.
I think I've pretty much exhausted my questions. Is anybody else? You know.
No, I've got a few more questions. Yeah, you can hear me. In one of your blog posts, where you talk about you contrast analytic philosophy and history philosophy and continental philosophy. And for those people watching that don't know, you have quite harsh opinions of the history philosophy and continental philosophy. I was wondering, in light of such critiques, are there any works in the history philosophy or continental philosophy that you have ever personally enjoyed reading?
Let's see. Yeah. Is there any good history of philosophy or continental philosophy? You know, I kind of liked Sartre's article, Existentialism as Humanism. I've not read a lot of continental philosophy because I don't like it, so I'm just not going to spend time. Sometimes Nietzsche is entertaining. So, history of philosophy. I liked Thomas Reid. I just thought he was great, and especially the way that he makes fun of David Hume. Okay, so actually, I mean, when I said that stuff about history of philosophy, I included the comment, I understand why we read the historical figures. I don't understand why we need research on the historical figures, right? Like, I understand why you give students Descartes to read. Okay, but yeah, that was another thing that, that I read when I was like just sort of starting out in philosophy, and I loved it, right? I understand why we give students that to read. I don't understand why we need people whose academic career is doing research on that. What are you doing? Like, we really need to figure out the exact meaning of this sequence of words on the page or something like that. Why are we doing that, right? Like that's my point. Like, I don't see this as an area of research. You just like give it to the students and tell them what he said and all that. You can have them in classes. But why is there a journal devoted to like interpreting and figuring out the exact meaning of his words?
Yeah. Another few things that are sort of interrelated. I've been speaking to I have a close friend who's a neo-Carniffian, and very frequently the topic of infinite regress and epistemic circularity comes up, and he's completely convinced that epistemic circularity isn't epistemologically bankrupting, and just in general, I find the debates concerning infinite regresses and whether they're epistemologically bankrupting extremely frustrating. It doesn't seem like anybody has the same definition of what's going on in terms of what an infinite regress means. And I was wondering if you could talk about those two things a little bit.
Good. I mean, those are importantly different, so I'll probably forget one of them while I'm talking about the other one. As the epistemic circularity. Okay, so this is the, in case listeners don't know, this is the phenomenon where basically you use a belief-forming method to conclude that belief-forming method is good, or something like that. Right? Like, you give an argument that modus ponens is valid, and your argument contains a modus ponens form inference in it. Okay. Or you're trying to you're arguing that your memory is reliable, and you use memory. Well, I've remembered a lot of things in the past, and very frequently the thing that I remembered was true. Like, it was corroborated by other information. I remember that happening a lot of times, so my memory's probably pretty reliable. Okay. Anyway, so does this, is this bad or is it okay? There's a widespread view in epistemology that this is sometimes okay. And I basically agree with that. And partly because if you don't, like if this isn't okay, then we're screwed. Okay, because like there's going to be an infinite regress or something, you're going to wind up with skepticism. Like you have to, I mean, if you're going to have any way of coming to believe that your belief forming methods are okay, you're going to have to use some belief forming methods to form that belief. And you don't have an infinite number of belief forming methods. So like there's going to have to be some circularity at some point. Right? Like, unless like you can form a belief without forming it by any method. Okay. Now, but what's the theoretical explanation of why that could be okay? And by the way, why is it not always okay? Like, I want to find, I have this toy called the Magic 8-Ball, and it's like, it's this plastic 8-ball, and you ask it a question, then you turn it over, there's a window in the bottom, and like the answer to your question comes up to the window, okay? It has to be a yes/no question. All right, and all right, so you imagine somebody saying, Magic 8-Ball, are you reliable, right? And then they turn it over, and the answer, yes, definitely, comes up to the top. And then the person announces that Magic 8-Ball reasoning has been vindicated. Well, 8-Ball says it's reliable, so it's reliable. And you think that's not good, right? So that's an example of epistemic circularity. That's clearly not good, so. Okay, but the difference between that and using modus ponens in your argument that modus ponens is valid, the difference is that the Magic 8-Ball is not, in fact, a legitimate way of forming beliefs. Modus ponens is. So, like, my view is, if you start from a method, okay, and the modus ponens thing is foundational. That is, it's a form of, it's a belief-forming method that doesn't require a justification before you start using it. And the Magic 8-Ball does require a justification. So if you start from a belief-forming method that doesn't need a justification to begin with, and then you start using it, and then when you draw a conclusion, whatever the conclusion is, it's going to be okay. And it could be the conclusion that that belief-forming method is good. If you start from a belief-forming method that does require a justification to begin with, so it's non-foundational, and then you use it to argue that it's a good belief-forming method, then that's bad. That's the bad kind of circularity. Okay, and you have to have something like this if you're going to avoid skepticism. All right. How about that? Sound good? Good answer.
That sounds good. That's a good answer. That's a really good answer.
Then the other thing was about the infinite regress. So I have this great book called Approaching Infinity, which all listeners immediately. It does describe infinite regress. It talks about infinite regress arguments at one point, although that's not the main thing that it's about. It's mostly about just paradoxes of the infinite in general. So it's kind of, a little bit of a complex subject, right? There are some infinite series that are okay, and then there are other ones that are not okay. So it's universally agreed that, I think, the so-called truth regress is benign. So if you have a proposition P, that entails it's true that P, which entails it's true that P, and so on. So there's an infinite regress, quote, infinite regress. Almost everyone thinks, yeah, but that's fine. That is, there just is an infinite series of truths, right? True that P, true this, true, so on. Okay. Then there are other cases where, so that's maybe okay because the different steps in the series are consequences of the first one, not preconditions for the first one. There's an example of the, I guess, maybe a vicious infinite regress is Plato apparently held the view that, so there are, as we discussed earlier in the conversation, there are these universals which exist necessarily, but he apparently also held that the universals instantiate themselves. Or in other words, there's a thing called beauty, the form of beauty, and it is beautiful. Okay, so then the form of beauty has something in common with particular beautiful things. So then there has to be another form. And you could say, right? Like, so there's two beautiful people, and they have in common the form of beauty. But if the form of beauty itself is beautiful, then it has something in common with two people. So then there has to be another form of beauty. And then this is a so-called third man argument that Aristotle gave, which originally was done with the form of man instead of the form of beauty. Anyway, okay. So then there's got to be an infinite regress of forms, and that's bad. Okay, and I take it that that's bad, unlike the truth regress, because the different stages are supposed to be explanatory. So you're supposed to be explaining like the fact that there are two things that are beautiful and they have something in common. I guess you're supposed to be explaining the fact that they have something in common by talking about the form of beauty, right? But then that introduces another thing that has to be explained, right? And then the explanation never ends because of the infinite series. Right, so like maybe that's why it's vicious, but in the truth regress case, it's not vicious because it's not like I don't have to explain the fact that P by citing the fact that it's true that P, and then I don't have to cite the fact that it's true that P in order to explain why it's true that P and so on, right? Okay.
On this topic, this brought something up to me about the liar's paradox. And typically, like I hold that the liar's paradox isn't a paradox because if someone says this sentence is false, and I ask them what sentence, if they say this sentence, well, that's not a sentence. Like that's neither true nor false. That's just two words. That'd be like ball is false, right? Like that doesn't make sense. But then if they say this sentence is false, the entire sentence, then what they're really saying is this sentence is false is false. And this sentence is false is false is false. So it falls, but would that not be a benign regress? I would hold that falls into an infinite regress, and this poses a problem for the liar's paradox because it's infinitely regressive. But would this be a benign regress?
Well, I think that would be controversial. So the sentence that they're saying is false is the one that they just said, i.e. this sentence is false. That's what's false. Right. But I mean, I think what you're saying is, I think there was, one of the medieval philosophers said this too, but I think what you're saying is basically, when you try to explain the meaning of the sentence, it's infinitely complex. Now, I guess a sort of paradox monger, paradox defender or whatever might say, yeah, but why can't there be a proposition with an infinite complexity? So there's a sentence with an infinitely complex meaning. I don't know what's wrong with that. Now I have a view about the liar paradox, which is in one of my other books, Paradox Lost. Another one that everybody should buy immediately. I mean, my view is basically, so there is an inconsistency. I don't mean the liar sentence itself is inconsistent, because that would just mean that it was false. Rather, there's an inconsistency in the conventions of our language. So our language determines a set of rules for assigning meanings to sequences of words. And basically, those rules are inconsistent. So there's no, and they work fine for most sequences of words, but they just don't work well with that particular one. The sentence is false. They give you inconsistent directions as to how to assign the meaning of that sentence. Right? So in particular, they direct you to assign to that sentence as its meaning a proposition that holds if and only if it does not hold. And there cannot be such a proposition. Right? So like there's no way of following the rules and assigning the meaning to that sentence. As a result, the sentence doesn't have a permanent meaning, and therefore it doesn't have a truth value.
Okay, cool. That's kind of where I arrive at is one way or another. The sentence itself is incoherent because either if you're saying this sentence is false. Well, that's not. This sentence isn't any. That's not anything. That's two words. That's glasses is false. And then if you say like again, this sentence is false. In order to again like it false. So yeah, I would hold that generally speaking, the liar's paradox is linguistically incoherent.
Yeah, I mean, so that sounds a little bit like saying the sentence is incoherent. But if that were true, the sentence would just be false. No paradox, it would just be false. we want it to come out neither true nor false, right?
I got you.
Yeah, but I mean, in my way, like what I'm identifying as the inconsistency is a little different. Like, I don't think it's inherently problematic that there's an infinite series, right? So what if I said this sentence is written in English? Okay, so then, like, it seems like that incurs the same objection that you made, but that's not problematic. That one has a truth.
I think that. Trying to think. I had a distinction between the two in my head just a second ago, and then I lost it like immediately. But I almost like immediately came up with what I thought was the distinction between the two, and now I can't use my ascertain what I thought would be the difference. But yeah, I get what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing with, the sentence is written in English, that's okay because, like, you don't run into a contradiction when you try to describe the proposition that it's supposed to express. But when you have this sentence is false, when you try to describe the proposition that it's supposed to express, it's got to be a proposition that's made true by its own being false.
Right. Okay. Sam, Scott.
Yeah. I've got no issues. It's just
I'll be right back.
in between the questions. It's so like I'm not sure what I'm supposed to talk about. I've recently read the collection of essays, Seeming and Justification. So basically, talking about phenomenal conservatism and kind of the internalist foundationalist club. And at the end of it, you talk about internalists looking at something within the neighborhood of phenomenal conservatism. It's like your language implies that there could be some variation, but there isn't really much room to maneuver. I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit. Like, like in a footnote you talk about McGrath and Markey. What figures kind of within this camp would you recommend I take a look at, and how much expansion do you think can really take place within this framework? Or do you think it's quite enclosed?
Yeah, I mean that collection is good, and I haven't followed subsequent discussions, so there's probably a bunch more stuff that's been written. But, so yeah, the collection Seemings and Justification, for anyone who hasn't seen it, is all about kind of phenomenal conservatism and a collection of articles by different people, including one by me. And so it looked to me like, okay, so I give this argument about phenomenal conservatism where I claim that alternative positions are self-defeating. So if you think that appearances are not a source of justification at all, then you're going to have a problem, because the reason why you believe that is basically going to be that it seems correct to you, or it's going to be in some way based on the appearances to you. So if you give an argument that appearances aren't a source of justification, basically the reason you're going to be accepting that argument is that the premises of that argument seem true to you, or something like this. There's going to be a point at which you believe something because it seemed true to you. And so then it's going to result that on your own view, you don't have justification for your own beliefs. Okay? Because your beliefs are going to be based upon something that you think isn't a source of justification. Okay. Now, one way of responding to this is to say, no, I have a theory which says that only some appearances are a source of justification. And it's not self-defeating, because the theory itself is based upon the kind of appearances that I say are okay. Right? So, like, you could say only intuitions are a source of justification, and my theory is based on intuitions. Okay, so that's narrower than my view, because in my view, like, sensory experiences are also a source of foundational justification, and memory experiences and introspection, like those all count as appearances. So this would be a person who's rejecting phenomenal conservatism as I describe it, but they're not self-defeating, because they're accepting the kind of appearances that their own theory is based on. So yeah, that's possible, right? Or, I think Markey's view, like the view of some philosophers is, you can get justification from appearances, however, you need something in addition to merely having appearance. You need, like, reason to believe that your appearances are reliable, something like that, and then you get justification. Okay, and then my problem with this is, well, you're not going to be able to get the reason to think that appearances are reliable without relying on appearances. Okay, now, one view is, well, you sort of like appeal to coherence, so it's okay if your belief that your appearances are reliable rests on other appearances, because it's still like this coherent justification, right? Because, like the appearances are mutually supporting or something. Okay, but anyway, but notice that the ways of trying to avoid the self-defeat argument do still involve claiming that appearances are the source of justification. Right? They're not like citing some completely different thing, like that you get these justified beliefs with no appearances. They're just kind of restricting the conditions on it. So, like what I said in that article was, so this strikes me as being in the same neighborhood, even though it's not my view, like it's not what I officially defined as phenomenal conservatism. It is in the neighborhood, right? How about that?
Yeah, that's really good actually. I'm glad that you talked about that explicitly. We've talked about a lot of phenomenal conservatism today, which makes me really pleased. But it's not very often that, as someone who isn't a philosophy student, it's not very often that I find someone who I can actually talk to us about. I think I've only got like a few more questions. Do you follow any particular practical philosophy, or are you just a pretty chill guy?
I mean, I don't know, libertarianism, right? I guess that's a practical philosophy. And the stuff that we were talking about before, basically I have a kind of pluralistic deontology, right? Which is maybe unsatisfying to most people, right? Like I don't have a theory by which you can algorithmically predict what should be done in every circumstance, right? Like you have to sort of intuitively weigh how important different obligations are in each circumstance, and that's how it goes.
Okay. What do you think about Ernest Sosa's virtue epistemology?
I don't know. I mean, so I'm tempted to say something like what I said about virtue ethics, right? Like the reason why something is justified is not that this is the thing that the epistemically virtuous person would believe, right? Because the epistemically virtuous person would believe it for some reason other than that they themselves believe it, right? So whatever that other thing is, that's what would actually make it justified, right?
I see. Okay. My last question is: have you read Ludwig von Mises?
I mean, a little bit, but not very much.
Will you read Ludwig von Mises if I request it?
It's probably not a good enough reason. I got a lot of stuff to do, a lot of stuff to read,
That's fine, I'm just teasing.
Yeah, I mean, so, like my impression is that he had a trenchant criticism of socialism, which is, just totally correct, right? But I don't feel like I need that because, like, I'm not tempted by socialism. And I feel like I understand what's wrong with it.
Yeah, we're not ambushing you on anything too much.
No, I think Sam's just kind of.
I'm just teasing.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions?
No.
Right. Do you want to show quickly? Do you want to show yourself?
Do I want to show myself?
Yeah. Do you want to sell your books?
Okay. Well, I would just like to repeat that I have a nice blog, fakenews.net, FAKENOUS. So it's not news, it's nous, like the Greek word for mind. Anyway, and but also buy all of my books. The ones that I mentioned, and also if there's any that we didn't mention, still buy them. And
I think we got all of them. He's not being rude, by the way. He's just a Brit. They talk weird.
Yeah, and so, also, you can find a lot of my articles posted on my website. Again, owl232.net.
I frequent your website. Whenever I'm like, I have this question. I feel like Huemer might have answered this already, and I go to your resources and look through your papers. I like a lot of your stuff on like Aristotle and in continents, Arizona, I like all your stuff. So yeah, everybody go to al232.net and fake news.
Is humor, like, if you're like, obviously all of us here like humor. I mean, I'm a rationalist, I'm a libertarian, and I'm a vegan, so humor's like my perfect philosopher. But humor's, he's got a collection of work on epistemology, which is, combines old and new. He's got one on vegetarianism. He's got stuff, he's got the one on political authority and when or when not it's justified. He's got one that's coming out on law soon. He's got loads of different paradoxes. He's got one on the philosophy of mathematics, and also his blog is really fun. His blog's really good. So if he talks about all sorts of topics, so just check that out.
So the I guess I have one last question, and that would be, so I plan to read Principia Ethica soon. But as I stated, your book on ethical intuitionism was the first book on meta-ethics that I read. In regards to intuitionism, who else would you recommend? I think Robert Audi is also an intuitionist. I've been looking into his books. Other than that, would you have any like non-naturalist intuitionist books that I must read?
Yeah, I mean, I think W.D. Ross is good. So he talks about the meta-ethics, to talk about ethics, and like I use him as an example of a moderate deontologist in classics, right? Like, you have the utilitarians, and then you have the Kantians who are like absolutists, and then you have these moderate pluralistic deontologists, and I give W.D. Ross as the example. He's very smart and reasonable. What else? So there's an article, a kind of famous article by H.A. Pritchard called "Does Moral Philosophy Rest on a Mistake?" And I thought it was very interesting and insightful when I was in graduate school. So pretty persuasive.
Cool.
He didn't write very much though.
Awesome. I'm actually planning on reading it tomorrow. Your existence is proof for immorality. I'm planning on reading that paper.
Immortality.
Immortality.
That's right. Actually, that is perhaps my most amazing argument, which we haven't gotten to yet. But basically, it argues that the fact that you exist is evidence that you're immortal.
That sounds cool to me.
In particular, there's about a 100% probability that you're going to be reincarnated.
Interesting. All right. Well, I look forward to reading it.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming here again. We really appreciate having you on. It's such a honor to be able to talk to you and have so much time with you as well. Like it's been awesome.
Okay. Great being here.
Thank you a lot.
Take care.
Yes.
All right, nice. That was a nice stream.
Wow, what a guy, though.
Great
Can we just talk about that?
Yes, Alex, switch me to host.
That was great. I got a lot of progress was made in 2 hours.
By the way, Sam, in America, shilling is kind of like a rude thing to say.
Is it?
Yes.
It's really like, yeah.
It's like calling someone like a corporate shill. Like it's like they're a sellout.
Oh no, I know. I'm just being sarcastic.
I know.
Sarcastic.
Yeah. But British sarcasm. I don't know. We didn't. Your sarcasm was not. I mean, I knew you were just like messing with him. But like because we're speaking.
Yeah, he seemed like he knew.
I was like, for a second, he was like, you want me to what? And I was like, oh
no. It's like, I didn't even think before I said that. I just said it in the same way that I'm talking to you right now. I didn't think about it. Go, this is edgy. I just like completely set up stuff. He has to deal with a lot of probably quite condescending, witty young philosophers. So I assume that he's used to comments like that. I hope that's okay. It's kind of interesting how like Americans and English people are separated by a common language. It amazes, like, the entire process where like we're asking questions. It absolutely amazes me that there's no formal process by which we ask him questions, and it's like a free for all. Like I can't get my mind around like how it's everyone just asks a question, whatever. I don't know what to do.
And he was down for it too.
Yeah.
Like there was no objections. He's like, yeah, I can stay here.
The only thing is wouldn't consider like the Bayesian position and inductive skepticism to be necessarily mutually exclusive, because like you're still agreeing that no, there's not 100% chance that when I drop this pen that it'll fall. Like I think even an inductive skeptic can say, yeah, like that's I think you can be justified in believing that it'll fall. However, you're still like you're not 100% certain. Like I could drop this and it transforms into a dragon.
Yeah, I'm gonna end the stream now because I have to go. Everyone, thanks for watching. This was a great interview. Again, it's so great to have Michael Huemer on.
Oh yeah.
I'll see you later.
Thanks, Michael. Good guy.
Alright, I'm leaving.